I'm Alan Mortis, and this is Think Radio Presents Think Business. My guest today is herbalist, author, and entrepreneur Briana Wiles.
No, more people need nature medicine that way, where they need to sit down next to a plant or a tree and just sit with it. And they might not get anything, but even sitting with it is better than not having gone to sit with it. You know, getting their feet in the dirt or getting their butt on the ground and being out in nature is huge.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio.
Think Business is made possible by funding from the ICE Lab at Western, supporting innovative business in the rural Southwest.
If you like Think Business, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think People, a celebration of just how amazing people can be. Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. Before we get to the really fun stuff, I do want to remind you that you can go to thinkradiopresents.com and sign up for our newsletter. Subscribe, and in your inbox you'll get some cool stuff every week, things that you don't ordinarily get anywhere else, including links, easy links to the show and how to watch those episodes, plus some content that we're not putting out anywhere else. So subscribe and at thinkradiopresents.com, and we'd love to have you along for the ride. My guest today is herbalist, author, educator, and entrepreneur Briana Wiles. Wiles is the founder and owner of Rooted Apothecary, retailing a range of herbal concoctions that she mostly manufactures herself. Those include body care products, teas, salves, and treatments, and essential oils. What makes Wiles' approach to her business unique, though, is that she forages most of the wild botanicals she uses in her products herself. It's a fascinating variation on the slow food movement. But the question is, can that kind of hands-on approach translate into a sustainable business? Let's talk about that today and find out. Briana, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You know, a lot of people start a business, and the process looks something like this. They've got some business savvy. Maybe they went to school for that very reason. They've got some startup capital. And so they survey the world and they say, okay, what's not being done that I can do? And they start a business that way. And they can be successful. The other way is you're already doing something that you just love. And it just sort of grows from there. Clearly, you're in that second category.
Mm-hmm.
Let me hear your story. How did you get to be the person that's out there, not just hiking through the woods, but really knowing what's growing there and understanding the uses of these plants, and then from there into, wait a minute, we could actually do this for others. What's your backstory?
So I grew up in Michigan, and I went to Catholic school. And so that wasn't a norm to be in the woods gathering plants or to be doing any of that, but it was something that always kind of called to me. And so by the time I was graduating, I was wanting to do something alternative. So I didn't really know what was out there in the world besides body work or some stuff with herbs, but it was like, where do you go to school? Like, how do you learn this knowledge of things that are passed down through people? So I started mentoring with body work for structural integration when I was 15 with a practitioner that was working on me. So that's when I really started studying like the alternative world of the mysticism of things.
Yeah, you're talking about alternative medicine,
Yeah.
alternative self-care,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so it started at a young age, and then I kind of plugged along. I went to school because that was what you did, and you had to figure out your anatomy and do all these prerequisites to even go to bodywork school. But the herbs are always an underlying lingerer of something I wanted to study deeper.
Yeah. Well,
So
and they go hand in hand,
They
right?
do. They totally go hand in hand. And so I started going to massage school at 18 after I went to 1 year of university and was like, And, but then I continued on because I needed more classes to continue to Boulder for structural integration, and also known as Rolfing. And so that's what brought me out here. And so getting to the Mecca of Boulder, I was like, oh, you can do all these things. Like you can do the herbs and you can do the body work. And it's just such a vast place coming out of the Detroit area. It was much different.
Well, I would think so.
Yeah.
Because although I know enough to know that even in places like Detroit, there are these little pockets of plants growing.
There's amazing
and,
pockets.
Right. It's not just concrete and asphalt anywhere you go.
No.
But let's be honest, the Rocky Mountains right here.
And it pulls a different type of people out here. So I think you get more of those alternative schools or the mindset of people that are wanting to do these things that are lost traditions or just it feels unique out here when you're coming from back there, but it's not out here. You know, it's kind of the norm. Everyone's a little slightly alternative with their thinking sometimes.
Well, that's a nice way to put it. I guess Colorado does have that reputation. But look, even still, you could have said, okay, well, where's the catalog where I buy this stuff?
Yeah.
A lot of people do that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but I
wanted to learn it. I wanted to go hands-on. And so it was actually moving out here to the Valley, which was 10 years ago, that I found Michael Moore's book, who's a passed-on herbalist. And that was where I started. I started reading about the plants he talked about and the medicinal value. And then from there, I started buying guidebooks and anything I could get my hands on to figure out the plants that lived here. Even though I didn't want to learn just the botanical, I wanted the whole ethnobotanical experience.
Well, okay, stop right there. What does that mean? What is
so
that?
Ethnobotany was a term I heard, I think it was my sophomore year of college, that I was like, oh, there's a word for that? And it's the word that means the study of plants through the history of people. So it's like the anthropological study of plants. So it's why we have the medicine we have, how it's been passed down. And so it could be through any culture that you have ethnobotanical studies.
Well, because plants and human culture have been
hand in hand.
Seriously, forever. Yeah. It's only a recent thing that we've really, even though a lot of our medicines are derived from those plant remedies, we've lost the
revivals come through again.
We've lost the awareness that that's where they come from. Right?
Yeah.
What was the thing when you studied
So the ethnobotany.
Botany, what was the thing that really struck you and grabbed you so hard?
It was in a myth, magic, and folk religion class that I was taking out of college. And it was the talk of like even entheogens or like psychedelic drugs that way. And like, well, how did these people learn so far back the ways to use these traditional medicines in ways that are like really far out there? But that was always like, whoa. And I'm like 20 at this time. So you're like, wow. And then from there, it was all the herbs that came along with it. I mean, it's endless, you know, depending on the culture you're studying, what you can see what their experiences are or what they're using for plant medicine or magic or mysticism. And the spirit that comes through in the plant medicine is what always really struck me, where I was like, plants talk to people? Like, what does that mean? What do you mean that the plants told you, or that this came from sitting with a plant, you know? So it was the mysticism that was like, how do you get into that? How do you study this, you know?
Well, so clearly your entry into this business it wasn't just solely science-based, because a lot of people would do that.
Yeah.
And obviously in your training you've had to go there.
Yeah.
But do you also consider yourself something of a plant shaman?
Oh, I don't love the word shaman for myself because I feel like that's for the elders or people of other tribes or something. I don't know. But I talk with the plants. I mean, they definitely communicate in ways that I never thought I could hear or listen to. And now that it's like I have a repertoire of plants in my head for the past, 15 years or so where I've been studying them, it just, when I talk to certain people and they ask questions about what they could use for a remedy, it's like the plants kind of just come through and they'll pop up in my head as like, oh, this one would be good for this person. Or it's like they want to come out and come play.
So whatever word you use for it, that really is the role that shamans play in traditional
shamanic,
cultures.
Yeah.
What sort of things do plants say? What do they have to say that we should be listening to?
I think it's dependent on the people. And so I see that a lot when I take my students out and we meet plants, and you can hear the different things that kind of even come through to students. And you can see that variation in a group. So it's different per person for what they need. But then you can also ask a question, or put something out there where something might come through. And it's not like you hear this loud booming voice of a plant, but it's just this subtle kind of reminder or this meditation that might come through where it's almost a mantra or something that the plant's saying. Sometimes it's a song, sometimes it's a hum. And there's a vibration, so it's not always words. But it gives you a sense of presence and being in a way. It's hard to describe because it's so variant. I mean, sometimes it's don't touch me. I don't want to be picked, and it's very loud and clear. And that's when you're like, oh, we're not harvesting that today.
Yeah.
And you listen and you don't just say, well, whatever, I need that. That has to come to the shop today. Like, we need you. No, we don't harvest. We're very respectful that way, or me or my students. When we go out, we listen that in tune, that we actually ask permission for everything that we take.
And how did you learn that skill in particular in such a way that you have such confidence with it? I mean, you're not saying, well, I think maybe I'm hearing this from the plant. You have a fairly high degree of confidence right now.
I think you just have to be like, no, I heard that. that came through. And it's something, I think a lot of us ignore those little voices of things that we hear sometimes and those intuitive responses that we get within our body. And some call it crazy or,
it's been called that before.
Yeah. And so, I guess you kind of tread that line a little bit, but...
Yes, some people are always going to call it crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but stop there for a second, because you're suggesting that lots of people could do this.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I think more people need to do it. More people
need special that you can go out and do this.
No, more people need nature medicine that way. Where they need to sit down next to a plant or a tree and just sit with it. And they might not get anything, but even sitting with it is better than not having gone to sit with it. Getting their feet in the dirt or getting their butt on the ground, and being out in nature is huge.
Well, sure, the whole process of just getting there
is
getting away from the sofa,
from screens,
from the television or the phone or the other people, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And so I think people can just keen into it, and it doesn't have to be that the plant's saying anything. It can almost be that you're absorbing from your time away from other things, and maybe that's just you telling yourself things, Like, it doesn't necessarily, we could call it the plants, but it could also be you turning off a little bit and tapping into what needs to be heard from yourself.
Yeah. And so, in your opinion, in your experience, what is it about that is healing? Because you'll see that. There'll be memes pop up on Facebook if you're on your screen that'll tell you, go spend time outside.
Yeah.
But let's get more specific than that. What is it about being in that setting and opening yourself up to those conversations that, in your experience, is so healing?
I mean, you relax out there. You get out there and you do sigh like I just did. You get to the woods and you can breathe in the smell of the woods, and it relaxes you. It's this connection that is so ingrained in our DNA, and that I think we've just pulled away from it so many different times through our lives or through previous generations. And so getting back to that it's like rewiring a little bit. And so that's why I think it can be really good for people, because it's breaking a system that they've been put in, and they're going into nature, which has its own system. And
well, that's a good point. That the fact is, the system that we spend most of our time in is very different from what's happening out in nature like that. In what ways, in your mind? Like, if you were going to draw a line down the middle of the table and you say, okay, here's how humans normally live their daily lives today, and here's what it would be if we spent more time in the woods. What are those things?
Time would be one thing that I think we wouldn't be such on a deadline for. You wouldn't have the knowledge of time. I mean, you would from the sun, but you wouldn't be rushing around because of time. Sound is different out there. You don't have a lot of the sounds that you don't even notice we have here once you start to step away from the city. The car doors shutting, simple things like that, where you're just hearing vibrations or things that can be alerting or startling. And in the woods, it's a different vibration. You're keening into the flaps of wings or the walking of animals or the tweets of the birds and different sounds that those are the reprogramming sounds. Those are the ones that take us out of that element a little bit more, I think. So it's something that we practice when I take students outside is to be quiet for a while, and sit there and listen to sound and not listen to sound at the same time, but kind of pick up the different things that you're noticing. Is it the breeze? Is it the trees? Is it the leaves? And that you watch the whole body relax when people just pay attention to those new sounds.
Well, it's interesting because sound is a legitimate therapeutic discipline these days, right?
People will pay to go for a sound meditation.
To go into a room and listen to sounds
Yeah.
that are piped in over some sound system. So that in itself can be healing.
So that, and then just the dirt, being around the dirtiness of the plants, I think is so healing for the immune system. And being outside from our sterile environments is really big and has a really big line to draw down. It is, dirt is good.
So you said a moment ago that you feel that the pendulum has begun to swing back in this direction. What makes you say that? If you just look around, it's not real obvious.
It's not, but you see subtle movements and you see more presence with it through what's being offered, through what people are interested in, maybe in even the retreat world or classes that you see being offered. It's much different, and people are really honing in on taking people back to the wild. People are paying for nature baths, which is just like going out to the woods and laying in the woods. And these are things you can facilitate yourself. And, cold plunging into creeks is one of my favorite ways to get students to start understanding like nature and using its
they're awake at that point.
hydrotherapies. Yeah, but all these things that it's like, oh, you don't get that in the city except for our irrigation ditches. But
yeah, well, but let's go back for a second because we've already acknowledged that if you do happen to live in Detroit or Denver, Salt Lake City, wherever, it's not like you're just sort of out of luck because you don't live in the Rocky Mountains.
No, there's so many places to go and find, respite or a place to go into the woods in those places too.
And is that your background? Did you find those places and sort of start there when you were?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the woods that I started to go to as a kid or that I loved going to hike as a teenager, that I would spend a lot of my time to decompress and do other things at, they turned out to be the woods that I ended up studying herbalism in. So after I was out here for about 5 years or so, I went on a whim to a conference in New Mexico that was for herbalism. And I knew nothing at this point. I was like, I'm going to go to a university to study herbs because that's what you do. And I showed up at this conference by myself, and I am at a core of my dear friends to this day. And what they showed me was, you don't need a university. You just need the right teachers to teach you the way of the plants and to teach you what the plants can do. And you need to resonate with someone that way. And I'm not a student. I strove to be a student. I went to school for probably 7 years and I don't have a degree. And
Well, you're in good company there.
So I went for all the classes that I wanted and thought could contribute to what I was studying, and always loved it, but was never passionate about the university world.
Yeah.
And so I met a teacher there in New Mexico named Jim McDonald, and he ended up being a half an hour away from where I grew up, is where he was teaching at his house. And so
That's
in
a
New Mexico,
coincidence.
so in New Mexico, I meet this guy who's got this crazy attitude and is awesome, and he happens to be from White Lake, which is 30 minutes away. So I was like, well, I could come out once a month and study with you. I think I could make that work for a year. And I did. I made it happen. And so in 2012, and my parents loved it because I was home every month or every other month, I would come home and I'd study with Jim for a weekend in his course. And we would go to the lands that I grew up on, and we'd go to these parks of the woods that I was tromping around as a kid and loved, and had this soul already in there. And then he gave me the perspective of, these are the plants growing there. And it was like, what? what? Oh my gosh, I had no idea this abundancy was here and all of this was right here. And here I'm out in Colorado and I'm thinking I'm doing all this stuff to get to this place.
What
and
an amazing story.
I kind of needed to turn around and go home for a bit, you know?
Go back to your backyard.
I needed to go to my roots.
And so the point there really that people could take away is if you're not in the Rocky Mountains right now, that doesn't matter.
Oh, no.
Right in your backyard.
No, everywhere is plants.
There are lessons to be learned. There are healing remedies to be had.
Yeah.
Well, and relationships
Yeah.
to form.
The dandelion in the crack in your sidewalk, you know? And the plants grow around you that you need usually is another cool thing that happens.
So that's another interesting point when you get into this conversation. So many plants. We actually have gone to the other extreme. It's not just that we fail to honor them, but we actually hate them.
Yeah. We
right?
target
the
them.
weeds, what we call weeds.
Yeah. Are some of our most valuable players.
Give some examples of that people would recognize.
Dandelion would be the first one that I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yarrow's another one that pops up a lot around people's yards that they're kind of like, it's not a pretty enough flower. Plantain, not like the banana, the low-growing one that's in the grasses. Purslane is all over around here, or the mustards. We have so many mustards that come up throughout the year.
The docks.
The docks. The thistles even, nettles. That was my saddest encounter this year, was finding that my nettle patch had been sprayed because they thought they were thistles out in a place that I'd been harvesting from them for like 10 years. So that was one of those devastating moments where you're like, oh, that was like a patch I could get 4 pounds of fresh nettles out of, and they sprayed it all. And it was a thistle-targeted thing. But when you don't know botany and you're out spraying things, you tend to kill things you shouldn't, I think, is what I learned with that.
Yeah. And so back to the question then. Do you feel that there is momentum to a re-education so that people who are trying to deal with noxious weeds, the ones that really are causing some problems, are also aware? Is there a movement in that direction that you can see? There is.
There's an Eat the Weeds movement where you see people keening in on it, you know, and you start, I think people just don't know. And it's even, you'll see it with something simple like purslane in the garden. And they're ripping up the purslane, which isn't really hurting the garden. It's a low-growing plant and kind of grows around everything. But once you tell them, like, hey, do you know that that's really high in omegas and actually like a superfood, and you could collect that and eat it and make things from it? And they're like, no, I just throw that out. I don't know what that is. And so you do see it. And I think people, I don't know that they would fight against it if they knew so much about it. It's more of like ignorance sounds like a strong word, but it's kind of like an ignorance thing where it's just, they don't know. They have no idea. It's what we were told to do. It's what we've always done. Why wouldn't we glycophosphate that?
Well, which brings us around to the subject of turning all of that into a business. Because a lot of what you've described really could have just stayed in the realm of love affair. Yeah. Briana's love affair.
And that's what it was for many years.
At what point did you stop and say, wait, this is something that people need, that they want, they're willing to pay for it. You said they're willing to even pay to let you take them out and dunk them in the river. So there is a market. Yeah. Describe that process of going from, I love this, but now we're going to do it on a different level.
I started making so much stuff. So I started getting into learning it and making things. And then we had a room that was Briana's apothecary room, and my husband would just be like, I don't know what you're doing, you know, and like you spend all this time in the woods. None of this
is going to explode.
With with a backpack on, and like you talk to plants is what you tell me. And this is kind of crazy. Like, this isn't going to go anywhere. And it was like, okay, well, I'm learning this is an educational thing for me. You know, like this is what I want to do. And so I was stubborn and was like, this is what I'm doing. And so it was during, I think, the class when I was traveling out to Michigan that I started a farmer's market booth in Gunnison. I think was the first thing I did. I think I did Gunnison and Crested Butte that year. And so I had maybe 10 different products that I had figured out to make and that I thought were cool. And I started selling them. And then I realized how much people liked them and the rapport that I started to get. And so it was over a few years, I think about 4, that it started to boom with it. And we were doing really well. And it was like, wow, we turned the plant stuff into an income. And if we can do that in one day, what could we do as a brick and mortar every day of the week? And so that was when the idea came. It was after I had started writing the second book, and I needed a home for everything. Our basement was overloaded with everything I was doing, and my husband was still like, you're out of your mind. No, he was more supportive at that point.
Yeah.
It was after I got 2 book deals that he was like, oh, you did do something out in the woods.
Yeah.
So you did take something home. But that was when we decided it could turn into a store. And so that was the leap we took to see what we could do on Elk Avenue and Crested Butte.
And most of these products that you're talking about, the ones that you make yourself, you're still out there in the woods foraging the plants.
Yeah.
For skincare products.
Skincare products is our biggest selling thing that we do. Yeah.
But you also offer plants that are meant as medicinal remedies and so forth.
We do.
Of all of the products that you offer, which is your favorite?
Right now, I'm in love with the Emerald Lake Oil Cleansing Face Wash. And so that's an oil cleansing wash instead of using soap on your face. And it contains cottonwood buds in it, and yarrow and calendula. And we all swoon over it. It's kind of transformational. So that one right now has been my leading one, but it fluctuates. It changes, and sometimes it changes depending what I have going on or what's coming out new. Or, but then another staple is like the Cottonwood Bliss Butter is one of the first products I've ever made. And that was I have a love affair with cottonwood, obviously. And that was one of the first creams I ever made. So that started 7 years ago or so. And it's still a staple in the store. And even I'll blow myself away with it where I'm like, why wasn't I using that?
And clearly you're getting people who say the same thing. They're coming back and buying it.
Yeah, and we have an online store, so we get that kind of repeat business too when we...
So what were the biggest challenges that you had to face in the process of going from Briana's love affair in the woods to brick and mortar retail?
Probably wrapping my head around all the accounting all the time, and that's when I decided to hire an accountant. That was always the most challenging, I think, just because I can do numbers in my head and like have a sense of it, but then putting it all out there and organizing it all isn't my favorite part of it. So that could have been...
In a way that the IRS appreciates.
Yeah, in a way that everyone's happy. And so I source out for things that feel too overwhelming, like design work or things where it was like, I would like to be the creative person. I like to be the artist of it and come up with the ideas and go out and pick the plants. And I still like to make things, but, a lot of my employees make the things now because we're all so busy with doing different things. And all summer long, I'm the one in the woods getting the plants and turning those into our infusions.
Boy, that just must be terrible.
It's horrible.
To have to
to have to go to the woods.
Bear that burden. Well, let's talk about your books for a second, because you've already mentioned that you've written 2. Started with Mountain States Foraging. 115 wild and flavorful edibles from alpine sorrel to wild hops. Wait a minute, you can eat this stuff?
And it's tasty.
Yeah, and the book is beautiful. I just really want to compliment you.
Thank you.
The photography is amazing, and it's well written. What were you trying to do with this book? I know you see yourself as an educator. If you had to condense the message of this book down for people who haven't seen it yet, what is it? What are you trying to tell people?
I'm trying to make it more accessible for people to see the plants. So was a really, really big part, was taking the pictures that were clear and visible and that they were big in the book, as opposed to little thumbnail size
or little
images,
sketches, which
are just like, what?
Yeah.
And I tried to really present the plants in a way that was easy for people to identify them, and then give them ideas that are normal and not super out there of how to eat them, like putting it on pizza or mixing it into a lasagna, or things where it's, these staple somewhat of foods that we have in our culture, or even different cultures, like how you can use the sumac berries for a za'atar spice blend, or different things that way. Just to give people an idea of all the different ways you can create and what you could use as a substitute, like bee balm for oregano.
Well, and the idea that you don't have to be miserable while you're eating food out of these are actually very tasty. Why is this so
bitter?
Yeah, I think I'm doing something really
My
good,
body
but
loves
I
this,
hate
but
it.
it tastes so bad.
Yeah, that's just not true.
No, and you can make it really good. And so I give a lot of fun ways to get creative with it and to preserve things. And that's what I wanted. I wanted the beginner to go outside and pick a dandelion leaf and not be scared to nibble on its bitterness, or for people to go out and find the wild mustards and to play with those greens in their spring salad mixes, and to be able to walk into the woods and find the violet flowers and know that they could nibble on those as well. And so...
And a lot of these things are turning up in high-end, expensive salads in restaurants.
Yeah, foraging has really taken off in a lot of ways where it's pretty bougie.
So you're contributing to that.
We're contributing to foraging's bouginess, I guess. But I also really wrote about being sustainable about it. And that's why we focus a lot on the weeds. So primary in both books, you find a ton of weeds or things that people would consider noxious or just look away from, or it might be targeted to be sprayed. And so I talk about how to sustainably go and gather those plants, how to avoid the areas that you don't want to harvest from because of spraying, or
how to not over-harvest.
Yeah, and how to not over-harvest,
like
how to tread and make a garden out of it so that you can keep returning to that flourishing area and not just decimate it.
Well, the second book is Mountain States Medicinal Plants. So taking that idea and flipping it around, we're not eating them now, but we're using them for various things. What sorts of things that people suffer from do you recommend they go to the woods to treat themselves?
You can treat with a lot of things. A lot of times there's a lot of things for respiratory infections where you have all your conifer trees, you have your usnea lichen, you have things like the grindelia or the gumweed that's all over here in the fall. So you see a lot for respiratory things, or bitter plants for stomach ailments or digestive issues. And then we also have a lot of mucilaginous plants, which is a funny word, but it means to produce it kind of means to produce more mucus, but it means in a way to moisten the tissues inside the body. And so out here in the West, where we're super dry all the time, we need those mucilaginous herbs, or they're also called demulcent herbs, and they mean to give us more moisture on the inside, so to hydrate us more in a different way than just drinking water. So a lot of people will be like, I drink water all the time, every day, all day long, but I just don't feel hydrated. And it's because they need a little extra. They need something like marshmallow in there, or the Siberian elm bark, which we use out here instead of slippery elm that you hear about more in the medicinal world, because slippery elm is more endangered. Our Siberian elm out here is a noxious weed of a tree.
And the point is, you don't have to go to China for these things.
No, we have so many things that are in
and you can teach
your
yourself
yard
to gather it yourself.
Yeah.
Do you worry a little bit about the liability of teaching people to pick plants that might be poisonous?
Yeah, so I cover in the intro to the book, there's a medicinal plant section, or a poisonous plant section, and that is to cover the basis of some of the most commonly found poisons that we have out here in the West, which we actually harbor the most out of anywhere in the United States.
Really?
Yeah, which is fascinating and scary at the same time, I guess. So you do really want to be careful, because there are a lot of things that could be similar, like in the Apiaceae family or the carrot family. We have poison hemlock and we have water hemlock. And water hemlock grows around the town of Gunnison like a mad weed. It's in the irrigation ditches. It's all over the place, which is like, what? How is this not mitigated? But it's not. And then you have things out here like our sacred plant of Osha, which people like to go and harvest little bits of, and that's another Apiaceae, or something like Angelica, which is another Apiaceae family
All of those
plant.
look very similar to each
They
other.
all look very similar. So you need to be really careful, and you need to know your poisons first. So that's why in the books I list the poisons first. They're not at the back of the book.
So you don't have to be terrified.
You
but
don't.
You do have to be educated.
But you do need to be educated. And, even touching poisonous plants can be really strong for people like me that are slightly shamanic. And they can give you energetics from the plants that can be a little scary. And it can be, so not to get woo-woo-y, but you need to be careful with poisonous plants. It's real.
Good advice. We're almost out of time, but let's bring it all the way back down to earth for a moment and put on strictly your entrepreneur hat. Because a lot of the people who tune in and who are most interested in your experience and your perspective are those that are sitting around thinking right now, I've got something like that I love.
Yeah.
That I hear from my friends that people would pay me to do.
Yeah.
What's your advice to them about being right at that threshold?
I think sit with it and feel it and really think like, can this happen? What if I do jump? What could I lose? Let's start there. Do I need a mass investment? And if you don't, and you're already kind of doing what you want to do, I encourage it, because if you're already making money at something you love and you see that there's a niche for it and there's an avenue that you can kind of carve out for yourself that can make it happen, it can get there. You know, like we started off, it was a whim. I saw the for rent sign in Elk Avenue and I was like, that could be it. And we weren't really planning on having a storefront at that point. It was just kind of in the back of the brain. But you have to jump at things like that, right? And it was, do we need money? And I didn't have a ton of money, but I did from farmer's market to be able to get to that point. And we just kept building. So it was like the more money that came in the account, the more we put into the business. And it's been the slow build and release of things. And now we have the 2 stores. And
well, so a lesson that we might pull out from that story is that you don't have to have all the answers.
No.
Before you take the next step.
I went for it.
Yeah.
It was something that...
And that can work.
It felt good in my body. And like that was the next step in life.
Well, that's not advice you're going to get from your accountant.
No.
Whether it feels good in your body.
No, but that's why I go and check with them when I have these body feelings. I'm like, okay, so I'm having this feeling like we should open a second store in Gunnison. What does that look like?
Excellent. Well, Briana, thanks for sharing your story
Yeah.
and for the conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think Business.